Welcome everyone to the co-hosted by Voices for Racial Justice and Education for Excellence Candidate Forum on Teachers of Color, American Indian Teachers, and Student Wellbeing. I'm Julia Freeman. I'm the Director of Community Engagement from Voices for Racial Justice, and I have the esteemed pleasure of actually introducing our moderator today. Our moderator today is Alex Leonard. He is a counselor at Patrick Henry School. He has been in the district, I have to say this again, he has been in the district for 13 years. 7 of those years were working as a behavioral dean at Henry. He has been a member of both the Educator Support Professionals and Minneapolis Federation of Teachers Union. In his time at Henry, he has created a number of programs aimed at addressing the current inequity and achievement gaps, including a prep class specifically for Black male students, which he co-taught for 5 years, and most recently, co-creating the Community Connected Academy, which is a project-based learning program based at Henry High School, and is just finishing its 5th year of program. So I'm excited to welcome him. Take it away, Alex Leonard. He's your moderator for tonight.
So let me start by extending my appreciation to Educators for Excellence and Voices for Racial Justice. Really appreciate the invitation here and the opportunity to engage with these leaders. I'm excited for you all to get a chance to hear from these candidates, and I've been impressed by what I've learned so far, and I look forward to learning more this evening. As stated, my name is Alex Leonard. I'm a counselor at the soon-to-be renamed Henry High School, Patrick Henry High School in North Minneapolis, where I've been employed for 13 years. Coming up on my 20th year working with students, that feels, it's gone by quick. And also, I just want to give a shout out to CCA. We're going into our 5th year this year. In our 4 years of graduating classes, we've only had 4 students not graduate. That's super important to me as their counselor. And I just always want to state that for our program whenever I can. So before we get started, I was asked to share why I'm moderating this forum. And as I thought about why me, I believe it's because my positionality as a person places me at a number of different intersections that represent various stakeholders and provide me with a unique perspective. I'm a Black educator, Black male educator, a union member, a community member, and a parent. And as such, I have a vested interest in this conversation on many levels. I'm also critical of leadership and not afraid to use my voice, whether that's asking tough questions or advocating for myself, others, or on behalf of my students or my community. On another note, in some respects, my answer to that question is simple. I was asked. And as an educator and a leader, I believe it's critical. A critical aspect of our role is service, and being in service of others, being in service of and to the community. And when the community asks something of me, I try to do my best with the skills that I have to offer. I show up, I see it as a duty, and I see it as a duty that we all share. So I was asked, and I'm here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. Speaking of being asked, all potential school board candidates were invited to attend this forum, and I'd be remiss if I did not address the fact that 3 MFT DFL endorsed candidates declined this invite. I find that disappointing. I'm aware of 3 candidate forums that have been organized by groups led by or intended to engage communities of color. These same 3 MFT DFL endorsed candidates have declined these forums as well. What has been stated is that the issue is sponsorship. I understand there are a number of issues among the institutions involved, and regardless of the disagreements, whether political or otherwise, there's an opportunity to speak directly to their constituents. I want to acknowledge that there is a history of harm, and to speak directly I want to acknowledge that there's a history of harm and a residue that remains unaddressed between these institutions. However, if that is the metric, then it is safe to say none of these institutions are in a position of moral authority. Choosing not to engage those constituents is part of the reason our district is currently in the crisis it is in. To decline these invitations is to perpetuate the status quo, and it contributes to white supremacy culture. As a reminder, the invitation is still open to these candidates, and if you know them or are connected to them, I encourage you to ask them to reach out and let them know that this was supposed to be their space too. With that said, let me quickly go over the rules for today's forum. This is not a debate. We'll be asking a series of questions. There is 5 in total, I believe. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. And after they have all spoken, then I may ask some follow-up questions. I think that's it. Anything else? If not, yes. If not, I'm going to go ahead and have each one of you all introduce yourselves. Let's start with Sonia Emmerich.
Hi, my name is Sonia Emmerich. I am a candidate for Minneapolis School Board at Large, and I am a lifelong Minneapolis resident. I've lived on the south side and I've lived on the north side, and now I live kind of right near Loring Park in downtown Minneapolis. I'm also the parent of an MPS student. My child has been receiving special ed services through Minneapolis Public Schools since he was 2, and I have been fighting for his access to education, and every year it gets more challenging. And as I've been organizing for that access, I've built relationships and networks with parents and community organizers and educators who are doing fantastic work, and it's gotten to the point where I need to make that advocacy bigger and higher up, because it's not educators that I'm running into difficulties with, it's systems that I'm running into difficulties with. So my impetus for running is hoping that I can have a positive impact on a systems level for equitable access to education. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Now I want to introduce Laurel Myra. Laurel, thank you for being with us this evening, and the time is yours.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Laurel Myra. I am an enrolled member of the Red Lake Nation, and I also have the honor of working for my tribe as the director of the Minneau-Bedizziwin Wellness Clinic. Minneau-Bedizziwin stands for Good Life, and I run multiple programs within Minneau-B, we call it for short, and their mental health and chemical health programming and children's programming is kind of my focus. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I have a doctorate in marriage and family therapy and family social science. I have 2 children, a 5-year-old in kindergarten and a 8-year-old in 3rd grade, and have had an opportunity to serve on the American Indian Parent Advisory Council for the last couple of years, and have just learned a lot about how I could be helpful and some of the needs of the school district, and I look forward to sharing a little bit more this evening.
Thank you, Laurel. Laurel, sorry for that, but thank you. And lastly, we have Lisa Shefty. Lisa.
Buju Anishinaabe Duke Lisa Shefty Indigenous Cause Misqua Gumiwe Zaga Ikaning and Tunjapa Kakabikang and Da. My name is Lisa Shefty. I'm from also like Laurel from the Red Lake Nation of Anishinaabe, but I've been also like Sonia, a resident of Minneapolis my entire life, specifically South Minneapolis. I'm a graduate of South High. And also I'm an auntie, and I've parented my niece while she was in kindergarten and part of kindergarten and part of first grade. So I've had experience navigating the distance learning, and also like you, Alex, I feel like I was definitely called and asked from my community to step up or to run for school board. But also, I've had experience working in um, South Minneapolis as an organizer almost my entire life. And doing a lot of youth programming. One of my first jobs out of college, I was a college prep advisor. So I really appreciate, Alex, you sharing about the how many students graduate. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you all, thank all three of you all for being here, for taking time out and to address your constituents. I'm excited. We're going to start off with our first question, and I think what I'll do is I'll start with Sonia, but next question I'll start with Laurel, sorry, and then next question I will start with Lisa. So we'll kind of rotate through. That way everyone gets a chance to maybe speak first, if that makes sense. So the first question is this. Our district is in crisis. It took a long time to get here, and it's going to take a number of school years to right the ship. With so many issues, so many stakeholders, competing agendas, just where would you start? And what would you make your top priority and why? Laurel, are you ready? All right.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start, assuming you hear me. My main areas that I would focus on are racial equity. I think that kind of encompasses all of the different areas in which I would be focused. So the area of the financials, I think, is really a top priority because I think it also impacts multiple areas. And I think where we put our money is really shows our value, what we really truly value. So working on recruiting and retaining teachers of color is a top priority within that. And then also doing some fundraising to help close the gap in finances for special education, and also addressing systemic racism through a council, hopefully, that can take a deeper dive into policy and procedures across the district.
I think I'm here. I'd love to give it a shot.
Yep, we hear you, and I'm going to send it over to you now.
Yeah, so I think, I don't think we can just start with one thing, considering where we're at as a district. But I think that we can be doing work on our climate and culture. So rolled into that, I would include work to dismantle racism and ableism and related forms of oppression in the district, the number of spots of intervention where that work has to be happening. But I also do believe that until we have investment at the state level, it's going to be hard to solve our problems, because right now we are in such a scarcity situation in terms of resources that regardless of how well people do their jobs, we are unable to compensate educators the way that they need to be compensated. We are unable to provide the support and the working conditions that are conducive to our kids getting what they need. And we have a lot of relationship repair across stakeholder groups that has to happen. So, I can say that I've been testifying to the legislature about education funding before I was a candidate, and I would continue to do that work and expand that work in partnership across the state, because we absolutely have to get investment from the Minnesota legislature to have the funds that we need to initiate the solutions that I believe as a district we can come up with together.
Awesome. Thank you, Sonia. And lastly, Lisa.
So I also think racial justice is absolutely important. I think from everything from teacher retention for BIPOC teachers, as well as engagement from um, BIPOC communities and students, and closing education gaps. And one of the things that I've had a lot of experience working within systems, doing system change, and actually one of the tools that I always use, and I've even brought it over in my current work at is I use the Voices for Racial Justice RIA, Racial Equity Impact Assessment. I've worked with it and brought in it to a lot of work I've done. So I think in order to achieve the goal at Minneapolis Public Schools to provide a high quality anti-racist education for students, for providers, for teachers, we have to be able to use tools that are available and tools that work. And in my experience, when using the tool, the Pocket RIA, I use that in a lot of different meetings, and I have worked with folks on how to align it with policies and procedures so that we can advance and get somewhere.
Thank you. So, all three of you mentioned racial equity. I'm curious, and I think I would give you all time to kind of answer this. I'm curious as to what you see in terms of what has been the impediment around us achieving some form of racial equity. And also, like, how would you mind like explaining maybe like how you see that issue playing out for those who maybe don't quite understand what we mean when we say racial equity?
So, I think racism is a form of oppression that's systemic. So what I mean by that is it exists at every level, in every system that plays out to create our public education system and all systems in our country. And so, that is a system that has to be dismantled. It has to be dismantled actionably, and it has to be dismantled at every level, right? There's myriad points of intervention. And when we are talking about how we see it playing out, I'll just give an example, right? So I've worked at the school where my child is enrolled on overuse of exclusionary discipline, suspensions, and inequitable use for students of color. And we see that everything from implicit bias from the adults in the classroom in choosing whether or not to refer for discipline, to the specific words that are used to describe the incident that occurred that caused the referral to happen, to how families are communicated with, has differences that are trackable, that are measurable based on the race of the child who is being referred.
Okay. I could start a little bit. When I think about in order to achieve racial equity or racial justice, I think about the fact that we have to get really good about understanding and defining what anti-racism looks like, what systemic racism looks like, and how it lives and breathes and operates within systems. And I think that the work I have done is trying to get really good about showing folks how we perpetuate disparities or we perpetuate systemic injustice in our policies, in our practices, in our procedures. And I think that if we can't, the thing about, sorry, the time clock is really making me flustered, but one of the biggest things I have to say about Minneapolis or about anti-racism work is that a lot of folks don't believe they might be that they participate in a racist system. And I think that we have to begin with training, and we have to begin with acknowledging it in order to try to dismantle and also and that's why I said we got to use tools that are available that community has created, and we have to listen to community. Sorry.
No, thank you so much. Laurel, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate Lisa's comments. And I would just add that, I particularly, and a lot of us, I think, have seen the numbers on the education gap and understand how not having teachers of color impacts that, and how the lack of resources in our district impact the racial equity issues. But we also, I mentioned earlier, also need to take a closer look or a deeper dive into what are the systemic issues that are creating and holding these patterns in place, and how can we break these patterns with new policies and potentially new leadership.
Our next questions are going to be related to teacher diversity. We're going to have 2 questions around that issue. And for those that need context around this, currently, the most current information that I have in terms of teacher demographics in Minneapolis Public Schools is that 82% of our teachers are white. It's 82%. That leaves 18 that are educators of color in our district. 18% are teachers of color. And that needs to change. Our student body is 65%, and it may be higher at this point. We'll see what the data shakes out with here in a month or so. But currently, last we knew, 65% students of color. And so these next questions are very important. Those are kind of the context behind them. The next question is we're going to be taking from Sharita Benson. So we're going to go ahead and play that video for you, and I'll make sure that I recite
My name
the
is
question.
Sharita Benson. I am an educator and a parent for Minneapolis Public Schools. I have experienced microaggressions and nefarious working conditions. From your role on the board, what would you do to improve how teachers of color are treated at Minneapolis Public Schools?
All right, thank you for that, Sharita. I think this time we'll start with Laurel, if you are comfortable with that.
Yes, I can go ahead. So I appreciate that question. I've had experiences similar working in large organizations that have been majority white in leadership and majority white in who's employed. And it's definitely something that is very known to people of color and Indigenous people, but not a lot of times understood by leadership or understood by fellow employees. So I think some education to help folks really understand what is going on in the dynamic and how to perhaps better support, but also some mentorship, because we know that change doesn't just happen a lot of times after trainings, and that additional support would be needed ongoing. But I also am a big proponent of evaluating how folks are being treated anonymously, and also through their evaluations annually, how they feel they're doing with understanding racial equity and understanding prejudice and bias, and following their journey to become more, understanding.
Awesome. Thank you. Lisa, you will be up next. And again, just to repeat the question was, what would you do to improve how teachers of color are treated at Minneapolis Public Schools from your role as a board member?
Okay, so I'm going to try covering up the time thing, but to help me a little bit with my thoughts.
No problem.
One of the biggest things for me in doing this work, I've done this work, racial justice work at Children's Minnesota, and we had some of the same demographics. We were seeing that our patient population was already was going to be the majority kids of color, but yet we saw like a lot of the majority of the decision making being based upon the status quo, the norm, white families, white providers, what made them comfortable. one of the biggest thing that I think is affirming. I think in Minnesota, because of Minnesota Nice, it's AKA a cover up to hide a lot of racial, implicit bias, explicit racism. And I think that when I work with other folks, people of color, BIPOC folks, it just becomes about trying to recognize and affirm their experiences, because a lot of times we try to make it seem like they're crazy, that they're the only ones. And I think that in order to meet them and change, we have to, one, acknowledge that it is happening, and number two, then put some real accountability and measures around making sure that their experiences are listened to and heard, and that we are not going to tolerate it anymore. Because if our teachers are being treated this way, if BIPOC teachers are being treated this way, then our students are being treated this way.
100%. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think that the conditions that teachers of color are experiencing are really visible to educators of color, and sometimes not very visible to white educators, white parents, white administrators, right, because of systemic racism. And so, I can extrapolate from my experience as a disabled person, a disabled parent advocating for my kid in special ed. I can see all of these little ways that the system is working against my child and working to harm my child, when they're not necessarily people who are actively seeking to cause harm to my kid or trying to make my child's experience, a bad educational experience, or trying to impose barriers, right? They just don't see where all of those places are set up, and in training and in systems and in policy, so that unless there is specific action taken to disrupt them, they just play out, right? And so I know that I've heard from educators of color that it's exhausting to try to consistently both survive those conditions and explain, try to educate other teachers or other parents or administrators, other folks at the site about what this is, why it's happening, why it has an impact.
I heard mentorship mentioned. I heard affirmation. I heard evaluating the data, kind of like exit interview type stuff came up for me, as well as just overall yearly kind of reports. Some of that stuff already exists, right? We've done a lot of this in the district already. So I'm curious around, I guess what's coming up for me is issues of accountability. And so how do you all, from your platform as a school board member, what would you see in terms of accountability that's needed? Or how would you create that accountability? And whoever would like to dive in could start.
So I think that we have this culture in leadership where risk-taking is not encouraged because everyone is really having to watch their back. It seems to me like everyone's waiting for somebody to mess up, or waiting for somebody to, to be able to criticize or point a finger at. And while I recognize that everyone needs to be accountable for their impact, right? I think that we need to feel like we can try new things together, and we need a culture that allows us to understand that what we have, our past practice is not working. It's not working for equity. It's not working for good working conditions. It's not working for good relationships. It's not working for academic success. So I think that we need to be able to feel like we have relationships that allow us to take risks together to move forward. And I also think that we need to really build out the site-based metrics for the strategic plan and the culture and climate framework, so that we have the ability to measure site by site using real community-driven, site-driven metrics to be able to understand how we're doing and where we need to intervene to create better conditions and increased equity for all of our stakeholders.
So accountability, I think, happens on multiple levels, and I think I had mentioned earlier the evaluation process annually. That's just one way, I think, to hold ourselves accountable is to have it linked to our pay and have it linked to how those around us believe that we are doing in moving along on our racial bias and improvements there. But I also think at the leadership level, there needs to be some way to evaluate the work that they're doing. I understand as a board that our role would be to evaluate the superintendent. So putting a process in place around that and at all the levels of leadership that go down from there.
Lisa, did you have anything you'd like to?
Yeah, I think that accountability is something new in the sense of like realizing that our communities, we're powerful people. Like I the work I really do is about trying to reframe. I know that like so much of it, so much of the narrative around Native people and also Black people are always about the deficits and the negative connotation about who our people are. And I think that one of the things about believing in is that we is changing the narrative to we're strengths based, we're strong, we have a lot of power. And I think that what I like to think about accountability, how I think of it is like from my community. When my community is fully aware of of the injustices or the opportunities that we have to show up and voice concern and come together, we are so powerful and we can hold systems accountable. And I think that we have done that. Our communities have been talking about holding the school board accountable. And I think that for me, that's why it's important that BIPOC folks are on the board. But not only that, like they got to be BIPOC folks who understand how to dismantle white supremacy and that's the goal. And we got to decenter whiteness in our schools.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. So we're going to pivot to intro to student well-being. So student well-being has been a big topic of conversation, particularly with COVID, online learning. Myself as a counselor, I definitely experience supporting students on a daily basis with a number of issues, particularly depression, anxiety, and the fact that a lot of those issues were exacerbated for students during COVID. So this is an important topic. I think it's an important topic everywhere, but particularly in Minneapolis public schools. And so we have a question coming from Coda that I'm just going to introduce, and we will have that up here shortly.
Hi, my name is Coda. I'm a 7th grade at Northeast Middle School, and I noticed that some of my classmates have left the school. What do you believe is the biggest reason that some students at MPS don't feel welcomed and included in their school? What is your plan to change that?
So thank you for that, Coda. I'm going to repeat it one more time. Coda said that they noticed that some of their classmates have left the school, and they want to know, what do you believe is the biggest reason that some students at MPS don't feel welcome and included in their school? And they want to know, what is your plan to change that? And I think this time we'll start with Lisa.
I think that when we're thinking about inclusion and we go back to if our students are 65% students of color, BIPOC students, and that's not represented in the schools, in the history, in the general education, if our stories aren't being told or being a part or being included, then it's really hard to see yourself or picture yourself being included or being a part and trying to and I know for myself, I've like I didn't have my first Black teacher was in ninth grade. My first Native teacher, I had a Native teacher at South, and I had him in the 11th grade. And but it was the Black professors and teachers in my life who really helped guide me and believe in me, and make sure that one of my ninth grade teachers, Miss Sadler, a lot of folks know her, CC Sadler. She is literally, I tell everyone all the time, if it weren't for her believing in me, for her to see something in me, I wouldn't have went to college, and I don't think I would have graduated high school.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I don't believe I've ever met CC Sadler, but that is not the first time I've heard that name. So thank you to them for their continued impact.
I think that we don't have a culture in our district that includes, welcomes, and affirms every student or every family. I think that this is due to systemic oppression, and I think that these long existing oppressions such as racism and ableism that exist in our district, paired with the state divestment of funding, means that we are having to survive oppression with very few resources for that survival. I think that many families have long experienced conditions in MPS that have caused it to be not tenable, not affirming, not safe, not a good vehicle for instructional delivery. And I think that that has been compounded over the last several years just because of all of the different things that we've been dealing with. And I think that that's why we're losing students and families. And I think that we need to repair our district before we can, in good faith, ask folks to come back and give us another chance. I think that we need to create safety and efficacy before we could ask families to come back for safety and efficacy. We have to deliver.
Laurel, are you ready?
Yeah, I think that that's an excellent point. And I would just add that the implicit bias that we've kind of all talked about is really one of the main reasons that, or explicit to, that people don't necessarily believe in children of color or the teachers, I should say, at the same rates as they do the children who are, white. And I think some of that is definitely misunderstanding data. So thinking that because, the schools in the suburbs or, certain students the white students are doing better because they have more resources, honestly, is a lot of it. And the reason that our schools aren't doing as well is, and I think that data isn't really understood, why that students are struggling and may lead to mistreatment of students, unfortunately. And so I think that that's something that I would really like to help people to better understand, is that the challenges that our students are facing.
Thank you for that. So I heard mention our stories being told in the classroom, teachers that are reflective of the students themselves. I also heard implicit bias, misunderstanding of data, and generally being misinformed about the way to go about this work. And so I want to kind of give you an opportunity to say more about any of those things that you'd like to say more about, because I think that those are such big issues. Our students needing to see people that look like them, our teachers needing to be aware of how their implicit bias may impact how they show up as teachers. So we have time. I just want to give you an additional 90 seconds to say more.
So I know that, I'm the parent of an autistic child, and over this last summer, for the first time, we had an autistic licensed special educator working with my child. That was someone we just got for ESY, and it was incredible because she instinctually and culturally knew what my kid needed, and he made more progress in the weeks over the summer that he worked with this autistic teacher than he had made, with other wonderful educators, right? I'm not saying that this is a better teacher. I'm saying that she already had like everything she needed to really relate to his experience, his ways of being and learning, his needs, all the considerations that had to do with why he was behaving the way he was or why he was acting the way he was, right? Like she knew we didn't have to do any of that development or front loading or parent communication. She was able to jump right in, so his progress was accelerated, right? So I can extrapolate from that when students have educators who are able to immediately, organically relate to their lived experiences, right? We are providing instructional opportunities and relationship building opportunities that really can help. I'm just going to say that really can help kids to succeed and make more progress and have more access, more equitable access.
Okay, I got to cover up my time thing on my screen. But the one thing I was going to say too, and Alex, you brought it up, that Patrick Henry High School is going to be renamed. And I don't know if people know the history of like who Patrick Henry was. And I don't know enough about it myself to even speak on it. I'm not Dakota, I'm Anishinaabe, but like it wasn't until like 5 years ago that I ever really understand the history of how the Dakota people were exiled out of Minnesota and currently still exiled. And a lot of those folks who made those decisions, who enacted like genocide on Native people, they're still remembered in the names of institutions within Minnesota. And even at like Bade-Makaska, we saw that like a lot of folks were so upset at changing the name from Calhoun to Bade-Makaska. And but there's so many words in right now in like Minnesota is a Dakota word. And so my point being back to being inclusive and knowing where you come from and being taught your history. Like most of Native people I know, they don't ever take an American Indian Studies class until they get to college. The fact that we're not, sorry,
Finish your thought.
I get cut off, but yeah, I think that name and place is so important.
Thank you. Go ahead, Laurel.
I think the history and really understanding why bias is what it is, the imagery and the negative effects of media and literature, I think, on the teachers and generations of people on how they interpret Native people and African American people, I think, is really unfortunate, and I think it's something that needs to be turned around. And I just really appreciate the work that a lot of people are doing, including Hennepin County Library, to really get more positive literature out there about Native and African American people, and to really help people to understand the history, that there is a lot of wrongs that have happened right here in Minnesota, and has a real negative impact on the historical trauma, has a negative impact on education, and plays into some of those gaps that we've seen.
Thank you for that. All right, so we're going to move on to our next and what I believe will be our final question before we get into some closing statements. This question's coming from a teacher, and this teacher's name is Teresa, and Teresa's going to take it away.
Hi, my name is Tressa, and I teach preschool in South Minneapolis. My question for you today is, what other government organizations should MPS be working with in order to meet the full range of needs of our students?
It's a great question. I'm going to repeat it one more time. Again, the question was, what other government organizations should MPS be working with in order to meet the full range of our students' needs? And we'll start with you this time, Laurel.
Yes, I would say the state. The fact that we've continually have had excessive funds and a surplus, and yet our schools have such great gaps in paying for things like special education, I think really speaks to an area where the state could step up and hasn't. And I think that we could do a lot more in the way of advocacy in helping rally together teachers and parents and students who are being impacted by this, so that we can help our legislators understand what our needs are, and so that we can access some of those surplus dollars.
So I think that being well partnered intergovernmentally is really important, and I try to really stay up to date with what, particularly what educational programming is being offered via Hennepin County, but also their newer disparity reduction programming generally. They have 7 areas of disparity reduction that they're working on, and they're all interrelated purposely, because we understand that housing impacts employment, impacts education, impacts transportation, etc. So I think that there's fantastic. I think that being well partnered with our Hennepin County library system would be incredible. I found out recently that 90% of youth that use in-person Hennepin County Library homework help programs are students of color. 85% of them are multilingual learners, right? So this is programming that exists, that's successful and efficacious, that we need to be a part of, especially because we are an impoverished district right now, and we need to really be making use of and leveraging all of those types of partnerships so that we can bring all the ideas and all the experience and expertise to the table for our kids, 100%.
Thank you. Lisa, same question. What other government organizations should MPS be working with in order to meet the full range of our students' needs?
Yeah, I guess the same as Laurel, like for sure the state, and advocating for the some surplus dollars to go into programs that community. So one of the things that I love about pointing out when I use RIAs or racial justice impact tools is the first question on it is, who are we working with? What group do we seek to eliminate a disparity, right? So if we're talking about students of color, then I want to make sure that we're saying BIPOC students, and then can we align those dollars with interventions around closing the achievement gap? Like getting very specific, but then also, one of my favorite questions, I think, best question on there is also about exploring the potential negative impacts. And I think this is so important in Minnesota because a lot of people make a lot of decisions with good intentions. And I think that sometimes, even with the best of intentions, we might still be could cause some negative impacts, whatever decision it is that we make. And I don't know if we can really truly do that without community and a co-creation with community on those solutions.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
finish that.
Oh, I just, that time clock. But also, me and Laurel and I are both, we're from a sovereign nation. And I think that, like, especially when I think about many Native students, is like how it would be interesting to me, like, how could we partner and co-create with tribes to to do this? And I know that we have the Minneapolis Indian Ed, and they are seriously underfunded, and they do such a great job about engaging parents. But also at the same time, like, a lot of our community is strapped on social determinants of health. And so, like, getting folks to the table is, we have to make sure that they have all the access to get there. And if they are strapped by time, by jobs, by childcare, by language disparities, or if they can't understand where the meeting is or how to get to it, then sometimes I feel like these systems are created to purposely leave us out. And what I love about community organizing work is I want to figure out the system so I can go back to my community and I can say, hey, guess what, guys? We can figure out a plan.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, I heard, again, I heard the state, I heard advocacy around teachers and parents and community members, the surplus dollars that are available. And I'm wondering, as I think about this, Minneapolis is just one district. Is there, however, like, these issues exist throughout the state. I'm particularly thinking of rural communities, and oftentimes that's going to intersect with indigenous communities and sovereign land. And I'm wondering how you see being a school board member, like, how would you see being able to utilize that as a way to kind of galvanize and get other communities in, right? Because I'm thinking about, like, the rural aspect, right? Like, rural schools have a need just like urban schools have. How can we foster those relationships so we're all working together in order to put pressure on legislator? Any thoughts on that? Whoever would like to dive in, go ahead.
So it was really inspiring, this last legislative session, because some local autism advocacy groups that I'm a part of or a partner with did some really great statewide organizing around using our state surplus dollars to fund public education across the state, and specifically targeting the special education cross subsidy, which is an underfunding of mandated programming that leaves every district in the entire state scrambling to figure out how to pay for programming that it's legally and ethically required to provide. And one thing that we did was found families of kids who are disabled or receive special education services that lived in areas of the state where they were the constituents of Republican senators who were voting against education funding, and organized to put pressure specifically on those legislators so that they were hearing directly from their constituents. There were maps, there were town hall meetings, there was testimony provided. I provided testimony, and getting to be a part of a really cool grassroots statewide organizing is something that needs to continue and expand, and something that I would definitely want to participate in even more if I were elected.
Thank you. Lisa, same question.
The one thing I really believe in is is people power. And I think that if we're in a position to inform folks on how to best utilize or gather the power in our voices, and getting organized, but also as I talk about this all the time with folks up north, other Native people, is we could be running our own candidates, and when we go to different events and stuff, and as we're learning, even this running for school board, I had no clue, and I'm still learning, and I can't wait for the next Native person or Black person that I speak to about this is what you need to do. This is what we need to do together. And I think that the more knowledge we have about how these systems work, we can improve them together.
Awesome, thank you. Laurel, did you have anything to add?
I would really just echo that. I mean, I think that there's strength in numbers, and we have some of the same issues, and you're right. It's the rural areas and the tribes and our urban centers that are really struggling financially, and I think getting us all together and working on a strategy, I think, would be huge and could really make a change.
So we have a few moments left, so I was asked to kind of ask one more question. This is kind of on the fly, but I at the top of this, I kind of mentioned the harm done, and at least one of you mentioned this as well. And so one question I have is, what role do you see the school board being able to play in repairing some of this harm between the various institutions? And what I mean by that is, you know, we've been through a strike. We've seen we've seen the negativity between the school board, the district, the union. I'm wondering how you all see yourselves being able to foster, if not healing, just fostering, being able to get into the same room and focus on a goal of working together. What role do you see yourself being able to play in that as a school board member? And we can start with Laurel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really important step that needs to take place, is rebuilding those relationships and that trust. And I think it would start with some conversations. I think both some formal conversations and informal conversations, where we invite different stakeholders and different parents and parent groups, I think, to the conversation and to the table as well, because I think that a lot of what has happened is there's been some negative impacts to people of color and Indigenous people. Again, that's kind of what happens when these decisions are made. I was in support of the strike for for reasons of better pay for teachers, but I also think there's some huger issues here at play, and that really get at how do we make sure that our children are getting the best education that they can, and that they do see representation in the teachers, that there's more teachers of color, and that they're having additional supports to help bring them up to where they need to be and where they can be. And I just really believe that it is doable.
So I've said a few times during this campaign that I've been parenting in poverty for almost 20 years, and so I have a scholarship and a cultural identity around poverty, and I have said we are an impoverished district, and the reality is that when you're in poverty, there are no good choices, right? There's this idea that individuals who are in poverty can good choice their way out of poverty. If poor people made better choices, they wouldn't be poor anymore, and any poor person can tell you that not only is that factually incorrect, but it's a violent way to think about people who are in poverty. So when I iterate that to our district being in policy, and I think about there being no good choices in poverty, I think, like the MFT did exactly what they're supposed to do. They did good, successful work in advocating for rank and file, right? That's what they're supposed to do, and they did their job, right? And when I think about our school board and our financial officer and our administration, their job is to put together a budget that keeps our school district alive while we are hanging off of a financial cliff, right? And they did their job. They did what they were supposed to do. We passed a budget that, has the district duct taped up so we can get through a few more years. And after that, I don't know. But the reality is that without investment in education at the state level, there are no good choices. And we are going to continue to have good people doing good work and butting up against each other because there's no good choices in poverty. So that's what we need to remedy.
Thank you. And Lisa?
So I think like I've done racial equity work, racial justice work for systems, and sometimes it really takes we talked about implicit bias, and I've heard a provider one time talk about like the thing about implicit bias is we can't even really train implicit bias out of somebody. And when I first heard that, I was really disappointed, and I was like, then what are we all doing? Like, I need a raft. I need an emergency exit. And then, sometimes that's why I'm back in my own community. I didn't even say that in the beginning, but I work for the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center. And that's how the CEO recruited me. She's like, you know what, let's indigenize our system. And, but the thing about it is I've done a lot of work bringing folks along on this racial equity continuum. But for me, I like to I can't start over here with the basic 101 training. I can't. I'm going to burn out. I'm going to be over it. And a lot of people of color, a lot of BIPOC folks were always asked to do this. And so what I like to do is be creative and crafty about like, how can I get more white people to kind of sacrifice some of their power and privilege and move from, and we've heard this, but I don't know if you've heard this before, but move from ally to accomplice. What is showing up? What is sacrificing some of your power and privilege? What does that look like? And then how can I learn to help folks along that continuum? And what does that look like? Because training isn't enough. We can't train implicit bias out of people. But what we can do is create a lot of people who can look at systems, look at the policies, look at practices, and change those. And then we can get a lot of people with a lot of power to help promote that too. And I think that like people, I believe in the good of all people. And I believe that when people are given the roadmap and they're brought along, they're gonna join in. And I want to believe that. And so that's how I see like hopefully our impact. So yeah.
So I'm gonna move us to some closing statements, and I think you each are gonna have about 90 seconds to give us kind of your final thoughts and your final pitch. So we'll start with Lisa, and then we'll follow up with you.
Okay, so final thoughts, final pitch. I just really want to say thank you so much for inviting us. It's so hard for me to do these virtual things because I really engage. I'm a people person. I need to see smiles or like irritation because then that's who I want to speak to in the room, And so I really appreciate all of you for joining us. And even for me, and I want to apologize to everyone who's like kind of mad at me for not having the best platform or candidate platform. And but like I really do believe in this work, and I do believe in that when we co-create with community, we are that much closer to achieving our goals. And I believe in the power and the beauty of Native and Black people completely. And I want to see our kids graduate too. And I want to see them, I want to see a different Minneapolis, in the future. And I don't know necessarily if I believe in that yet, because even my niece, she's in the second grade. There's 25 kids in her classroom. I'm worried. I'm always worried about her education and how she's reading and how she's doing and representation, what that feels like for her. And yeah, I just want to say thank you, Miigwech.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for having us, and for those of you listening in. I really just want to highlight some of my experience. I think that will be really helpful in some of the work on the board that needs to be done. And I would say, I am an educator and in a primarily white university, and I find that there's research out there too that says that teachers of color and Indigenous teachers really bring a lot to students to help them to learn in a different way than they've historically learned in school. So I think that it's really important, again, just to echo the fact that we really need to focus on recruitment and retaining teachers of color. And I would also mention that I've had 7 years of experience as a director. It's not a lot, but I definitely have been in the trenches and helping to balance difficult budgets and fundraise, whether it's been through legislation or through private agencies, being able to balance a budget and be able to bring in necessary funds is essential.
The topics for tonight were educators of color and student well-being. And I have been reflecting on how vital it is to believe our students and believe our educators, particularly our educators of color and our Indigenous educators, when they tell us what they are experiencing and what their professional lives are like. I think I make a lot of connections. That's how I do work. That's how my brain is successful. I make a lot of connections, and I can't help but connecting my experience advocating for my child in this district to the experiences that so many other people are having, either advocating for themselves, advocating for their communities, or advocating for their children or their students. And I need for people to believe my child and for people to believe me when I'm speaking on behalf of my child. And I don't want to have to prove that he needs help or that he needs a particular service or that something isn't working for him or that something is causing him harm. I just want to be believed when I advocate. And I think everyone is needing to be believed about their experiences right now.
Thank you. And with that, I think I'm going to toss it back to Julia. Thank you all.
I want to say thank you to Alex Lindert for brilliantly moderating this forum today. It was excellent. And I want to thank the candidates as well for their participation, for showing up, because you showed up. I want to thank you for coming. You could have spent your time doing many things to this evening, but you joined us. And you joined us because it's important for you to make an informed decision in November. So please also take what you heard today, take what you learned today, and share with your community. So then when they go to the polls, they will remember who showed up for community. Thank you.